You didn't see her. She left. She's already gone. Then I'll go out. Do you know how much I'm afraid of her? Who? Myself. Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. And today we will talk about something frightening, the most terrifying beast in the forest, ourselves. We always want to make this projection, a projection onto another person or others, those we fear, those who forbid us something, those who deny us opportunities. And by making this projection, we free ourselves from the feeling of guilt. But we frequently and often attribute our own internal thoughts to others, firmly convinced that we are accurately reading their minds. As I say in the stalker group, you shouldn't project your own thoughts onto Aunt Olga. For example, when someone starts telling me what I thought or what I might have thought, I say, no, that's not my line of thinking at all. So let's sort this out together. I've chosen the points that seem most important to me. There is absolutely no doubt that the comprehensive list I am presenting to you today could be expanded significantly further than this. But in my view, these are the key points. The first point is punishing oneself with shame for being bad. Each of you has childhood memories of when some relatives would come over for some holiday, or when you came to visit and you were introduced to these unfamiliar people to whom you were expected to smile. Why don't you want to hug Uncle John? This is your cousin. Why aren't you smiling? To Grandma Jean? She's your grandmother. And at that moment, we would stretch our faces into a smile or hug these unfamiliar, strange people whom we were afraid of, pretending to feel some kind of joy. We felt caught and forced to do something. And now, when we actually do this same thing to our own bodies, we often don't even recognize it's happening. For example, you come to the doctor and they need to listen to your lungs with a stethoscope. And there are students sitting in the doctor's office. And the doctor says, today there is a group of students from some institute and they will be present during the examination. Do you mind? And you say, I don't mind, even though you are completely against these strangers looking at you undressed. So what is it inside that keeps you from saying, no, I do mind? Because it seems like there's no real reason to defend yourself. It seems like this doctor isn't malicious and he is asking for your permission. And it's at this moment when the other person is smiling, friendly, and it feels almost improper to object that we start to sacrifice ourselves. And then when we leave that office, we'll feel that we have betrayed ourselves and committed emotional violence against ourselves. In other words, we have certain rules, the right rules. By following these rules, we avoid being punished by our own shame for having shown some kind of badness. And often this shame follows us because, for example, we said, I am against having these students present during my examination. And at that moment, it's as if we are whipping ourselves with a rod. We often feel ashamed for not being kind enough, polite enough, proper enough, and so on. Especially if the doctor with a displeased expression said, all right, everyone, please leave. This is a feeling of complete shame, of being bad and wrong. We force ourselves to smile, to humble ourselves, to submit. And in that moment, we are not making a conscious choice. With those same students, for example, if I weren't driven by the compulsion to be proper, I would have paused and said, I need to think about it. I thought it over and said, this would be rather uncomfortable for me. I wouldn't want to offend you, dear students, or cause problems for you, doctor, but no. And in making such a conscious choice, we do not feel forced. Or, for example, we come to the doctor and students are sitting there while we have an infected finger. It's just a finger, it's fine, students are there. I thought about it, considered the situation and said, yes, it's fine, let them stay. So you see, this isn't coercion, but a conscious choice made in the moment. And the paradox is that we can feel shame for emotions that we haven't even expressed. For example, at the doctor's request, I might feel anger. I won't show this anger, I'll smile, but afterwards, when I leave, I'll feel ashamed without understanding why. So, with this shame, I force myself to be good, and I get angry about it. But I'm not allowed to bring my anger into consciousness, while shame, in a way, is acceptable. It's considered a noble feeling. So these moments, when we feel this compulsion, it can also have an opposite effect where we start to become excessively aggressive. That is, when we say, no, I'm against the students, we become overly aggressive, and then we definitely feel like we're in the wrong. In other words, we respond to our own compulsion to be proper and good with anger, as if, for example, as children, we might have reacted this way to being forced by significant adults to smile at Uncle Vasya. And only through this anger can we break through that compulsion. We don't understand why such a small request from someone else triggers so much aggression in us. And we feel ashamed about that too. So sometimes we are afraid to enter into relationships where someone might ask us for something and we won't be able to say no. Or those specific situations where we feel forced to behave properly at all times, where we have to live up to some perfect and ideal image of ourselves, a standard that demands we stay positive and ensures we are never seen in a bad mood or struggling with our emotions, never unwilling to communicate. In other words, this is that compulsion. The shame that punishes us, we often project onto other people, even though it is entirely our own. The second point, a difficult one, I will go slowly. It is the feeling we feel a sense of unbearable sorrow when we see homeless animals, homeless people, and those begging for alms, or people who are asking for help. In that very moment, you may even begin to feel that you want to cry inside. In other words, the pity is overwhelming, unbearable. It is as if the only possible way to completely help and not feel this overwhelming sense of pity and this suffering is to give away everything you have. Here, we are projecting an incredibly profound and deep-seated trauma, one that every single one of us carries within our souls. That is, when we are first brought into this vast and complex world, at first we perceive it as a world that should revolve entirely around our own needs and desires, and all of my internal emotions speak clearly to this truth. For example, it hurts me when no one picks me up. It hurts when no one wants to play with me. It hurts when I am not fed. It hurts when I am not taken outside. So, relying on our feelings, we come to a definite conclusion that this world is cruel and does not love me enough. And especially for those people who have experienced some moment of abandonment when they were sent to their grandmothers, to daycare at an early age, and so on, or when strangers were hired to look after them. This sense of pity for abandoned people will be felt especially acutely. So how can we distinguish when we are projecting and when we are truly empathizing? For example, this shame is of such incredible intensity, burning, and it comes from so deep within from the very first point that you can confidently conclude that this is a projection. In other words, I am doing this to myself, but it seems to me that it is someone else doing it to me. When we start attributing these non-existent thoughts to other people, believing that they are judging us, saying something about us, and so on, and especially when we catch a judgmental look from someone, it resonates with our own internal judgmental gaze, and all of this intensifies. In the same way, pity can reach the point where you want to cry, where you want to give away everything you have, or you feel disgusting because you can't help. And as a kind of compensation, this leads to demonizing those who need help, just so we don't feel like bad people ourselves. It's as if I need to completely devalue this person in order not to feel my own guilt for this burning feeling of loneliness, of being unwanted, of being unsaved. And it's as if something inside us pushes us to become a savior for someone. And of course, scammers take advantage of this. When we experience all of these precious formative moments during our early childhood, relying on our feelings when we sense that the world doesn't care enough, doesn't love enough, and isn't there for us, there is always this thought that some kind of savior will appear who will fix everything. And so the fantasy begins about some person, about other parents, about some kind uncles or aunts who aren't here now, but whom I will meet. Or perhaps I will meet my future husband or wife who will save me from all of this. And in the moment when we help, we connect with this apex of the Savior. That is, by helping lonely, unhappy, homeless people, we feel a surge of happiness that I helped, that I saved someone. I'm not saying this is bad, nor that this is something you must do. Undoubtedly, we should care for those who are suffering. I'm talking about this inner feeling of abandonment and uselessness that instantly surfaces. And at that moment, we no longer see the subject or the object. We are completely interacting with ourselves, drowning in these emotions. And we are convinced that this person or this animal is experiencing exactly the same thing. In other words, we do not distinguish between what is ours and what belongs to someone else. This is the moment when boundaries are lost and projection occurs. The third point, when we are very afraid of ourselves, when we are in a state of hysteria, we don't notice how we avoid those moments where we might experience overwhelming emotions. We don't bring them in, or more precisely, we don't know what to do with them. And at that moment, most often we abandon ourselves because reuniting with ourselves when we are losing control, feeling anxious, afraid, or angry is unbearable for us because it would mean admitting that we are in fact like that. And this is the moment when we are afraid. We are afraid essentially of the hysteria that we might create for ourselves. It's like realizing that you're not actually afraid of the elevator itself or of riding in it, but rather of the panic attack you might have. You're not afraid of flying on airplanes, but of the panic attack you might have. You're not afraid of rejection, but of the panic attack you might have as a result. You're not afraid of failure, but of the panic attack you might have as a result. And this realization that I am the one doing this to myself helps to gradually start reducing both the intensity and the duration. These panic attacks, especially the panic attacks that happen in the morning when we, maybe didn't get enough sleep or just want to stay in bed a little longer. And this inner rebellion, the feeling that I don't want to get up, that I'm miserable, that the world is against me, that I'm a martyr. This sense of being unable to get up is perceived by the instinct for self-preservation as if I myself am becoming a threat to my own well-being. Because if I don't go to work, then I'll get fired and won't have money to live on. And at this moment, autoaggression is triggered. In other words, we respond to our own hysteria with cruelty. We begin to force ourselves almost sadistically to do it. And at that moment, we feel pain and don't understand why. So beforehand, there was hysteria that we tried to calm down, also with a rod. You must, you have to, and so on. And so we end up swinging between being a lazy bundle lying around and a hamster that's constantly running on its wheel. That is, without understanding these internal tendencies, our inclination toward laziness, toward procrastination, we might pull ourselves out of self-aggression and then start doing things compulsively without stopping, unable to pause until we collapse. This kind of getting stuck, only whether it's sinking into a lazy bundle, lying there like a swaddled baby, or becoming like a hamster running endlessly on a wheel, it all points to the fact that we are doing this to ourselves, yet we don't realize that we are the ones doing it. And we fear that angry version of ourselves in the morning when we won't want to get out of bed. In other words, a person who doesn't get up can't even enjoy lying there because in that moment they start attacking themselves. Next point, the inability to tolerate one's own imperfection, ignorance, lack of understanding, lack of control, being wrong, or not being the main person. In other words, for us, The norm is when we are right, we are in charge, we are not inadequate, we know, we are confident, and so on. Only in this state do we feel safe. As soon as we encounter our own imperfection, lack of importance, or lack of understanding, we collapse downward. In other words, this feeling of collapse wouldn't exist if we weren't standing so high up. I often repeat this in different ways in my videos, and I'll say it again because I see from my clients and from the group how easily it is forgotten. This sense of inadequacy, this burning sense of inadequacy, can only be felt if you are standing on a pedestal. If there is no pedestal, there is no sense of inadequacy either. And at that moment, we are unable to accept ourselves as weak, unknowing, not in charge, forgetful, and so on. And we start to build justifying constructs that confirm our own rightness. Or we begin to distort reality, to complicate the situation so much that we end up not being at fault for anything, and instead the blame lies with the stars, the world, other people, and so on. And in this way, we drive ourselves crazy because in our worldview, if something doesn't go the way I want, then someone must be crucified for it. Either me as the one to blame or someone else as the one responsible for it. In other words, this inability to think in terms of cause and effect when you understand that every event is determined. By certain internal tendencies, you always react with the desire to punish the guilty party. That is, if I can't get what I want, then someone must be at fault for it. Is it me or is it you? And that's why we can't think in complex ways. We can't learn anything because scolding ourselves, as they say, punishing ourselves, is not the same as understanding something, not the same as understanding how you ended up in this situation. And the last point, the reason we are so afraid of ourselves, is the fear of falling into the state of a martyr. As I say, this is a tomb for the personality. When the personality falls into the state of a martyr, it feels completely innocent, not guilty of anything. It makes no demands of itself, it suffers, but at the same time, it blocks all activity. That is, you can, in a way, blame this world and remove the feeling of guilt from yourself. Because I will punish myself with self-aggression, but at the same time, I begin to block my own activity, and I start to treat the world with hostility and pretentiousness. So I am constantly suffering, but at the same time, I hate, I fight, I resist, and so on. This is how we are afraid of ourselves. More precisely, this is what we do to ourselves, and it is difficult for us to understand that. We are the ones doing this to ourselves. Please write in the comments, why are you afraid of yourself? Are you already able to notice these projections in others when you are convinced that it is someone else causing you discomfort, but in reality, you are doing this to yourself? And as always, at the end, I invite you to our upcoming project, Connect One, the boldest project yet. This is a project we are running with our team, where I will be conducting open psychoanalytic sessions and explaining why I chose a particular approach. And not another, answering your questions and explaining which structures of the psyche I encountered during the session. Well, this is where I say goodbye to you. Please like the video and leave your comments. See you next time.